Josh Brown, we're still reeling from one of the stupidest decisions in modern gaming history. The closure of 4 Bethesda studios, including Arcane Austin and Tango Gameworks, developers of Prey, Dishonored, and The Evil Within / Hi-Fi Rush, respectively. The entire industry has kind of came out and just said how boneheaded this decision is, especially through the lens of Xbox / Microsoft. When they have Game Pass, they have this whole idea of various dream projects coming together and then cleaving the one thing that did work, let's say, across the last 10 plus years. There's a lot of different bits to this because various insiders, including The Verge's Tom Warren and Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, have now shone a light on what the hell's happening over at Xbox. And the results are pretty bad. I've wrote down bad to apocalyptic, but we'll get there as to the future of Xbox itself. But like I said, I want to break down different parts of this. Firstly, clarification on what the hell happened over there and why the studios were closed. This is that Microsoft were actually behind the decision directly. Apparently they reportedly forced Bethesda's parent company ZeniMax to downsize, resulting in them cleaving studios that had new projects in the works, including a Hi-Fi Rush sequel. And they also didn't want any projects in the works that would require more staffing up. They wanted to minimize that as much as possible, which also led to the other studios being shut down. However, like I said before, Xbox's head of gaming, Matt Booty, recently said internally that Xbox needs smaller games that give us prestige and awards, and Hi-Fi Rush just won a BAFTA less than a year ago. Thoughts on this stuff before we even keep going?
Scott, you know, when we did the initial reaction the other night to this news coming out and we kind of scrutinized Matt Booty's initial statement, I kind of felt a little bit bad after that. I thought, have I gone in too personally on this guy that I just don't know about? Maybe it was just like a one-off statement. Maybe the messaging will be better. It seems like every single thing, both internally and externally, that they try to do to make this make sense just backfires massively. Like that thing about them wanting smaller, prestigious games after they've just shipped Hi-Fi Rush, which was critically acclaimed and won Game of the Year awards. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It feels like they're trying to spin something, like you alluded to there, from Microsoft. You know, this feels like it's come from the top, and that was reiterated in the Bloomberg report, and they're trying to save face, trying to make it make sense, because if they just came out and said the reality of it, which is we needed to boost revenue 1% so the shareholders were happier, like no one would enjoy that at all. But this kind of spin is somehow even worse.
Well, there's just no consistency. Like, as I'm going to get there in terms of, like, there's a lot of information came out across the last few days. Like I said, you've got 2 of the best reporters in the game, Tom Warren and Jason Schreier, getting stuck in. But also in regards to Matt Booty, some of the reporting from Jason Schreier as regards to the way that he's conducting himself internally mentioned that, like, the executives at his level are apparently spread a bit too thin across all the different studios that they've acquired. And in Booty's own words, like too little peanut butter on too much bread, which is a very Lord of the Rings style way of doing this. But why go out there and spend billions acquiring this many different projects and studios if you have no way of managing them?
I feel like I'm like losing my mind. I feel like I'm going insane with every new word that comes out of their mouths. What do you mean you were realizing you were spread too thin like peanut butter over a slice of bread? No one forced you to buy all these studios, man. Like, you didn't have to do this. You didn't have to go out and spend $7 billion on Bethesda and buy up Double Fine and Obsidian and Ninja Theory and then go in and spend $70 billion on Activision. If you didn't have the long-term plan, I'm sorry, but it's you who should be going and not the studios. If you didn't have the resources to back these studios up, you knew what you were buying. You don't just decide to buy a studio like I decide to buy a tub of Pringles when I walk home from work. You know what I mean? It's due diligence. It's months at a time of negotiations and processes and behind the scenes stat crunching. You can't tell me that you bought 30 studios and then just realize now that you don't have the executive power to prop them all up. Like, what?
There's a whole thing as well with shout out to MinMax over on YouTube. There's a interview with one of the directors of Hi-Fi Rush talking about when they were developing that game, they had zero feedback from Matt Booty or Phil Spencer, nothing directly anyway, which is just an interesting insight into the way that all those projects come together, because that also happened with Redfall, one of the most disappointing games in Arcane's history, but one of the most disappointing games in regards to something that Xbox could have pinned some subscriber numbers onto or something like that. And in the wake of that, you had Phil Spencer just saying, like, yeah, we weren't really monitoring what was going on. I guess that's on them kind of thing. And it's just like, is it as simple as that, where we signed a whole bunch of blank checks, we got you on board, we wanted to talk about Game Pass and big subscriber numbers in theory, and then we didn't actually monitor or make sure any of this would come together, and now the rubber's hitting the road, or the poop's hitting the fan, and all sorts of different cuts are starting to happen. I'm going to get to some more stuff in regards to cuts, but just final thoughts on that stuff.
Dude, like, you know what, to be fair, maybe they did genuinely just think that these studios would kind of run themselves and be successful without them needing to meddle at all, because like you said, that's kind of their MO even for the studios they own, you know? It seems like they just give studios like 343 free reign and then wonder why Halo Infinite isn't ready a few months before it's supposed to launch. So maybe that was their pie in the sky plan, which I still think is a failing on them, because that's naive. Anyone knows, like, look at Activision. Look at the reputation of Activision Blizzard and the franchises they own over the past few years. Everyone who was optimistic about that deal was looking forward to Microsoft directly changing those companies, whereas Microsoft was probably looking at just acquiring them and letting them do whatever they do to print money. So maybe that's what they were looking at these other publishers and developers to do for them. And now that they realize, buying someone, you know, it demands more hands-on work. We are supposed to give as much to them as they're supposed to give to us. And they're going, oh no, we didn't sign up for that, even though they obviously did.
That's the thing. It comes across like this really simple thing of just, I will purchase object will continue being what it was with zero oversight. And maybe somewhere down the line, someone like a Matt Booty or a Phil Spencer or whoever will finally just reveal the reality of what it was like managing all this stuff across the last few years. But Jason Schreier did report over on Bloomberg that Microsoft are planning more cuts going forward in a bid to make Xbox's financials make sense. There's a whole wider conversation on the acquisition of Activision Blizzard, obviously buying Call of Duty, what they were going to do with Call of Duty, and the fact that was $69 billion. Someone calculated that that would have paid the wages of all these studios for the next 17 years, as opposed to trying to just buy up Call of Duty, which is a whole thing. Schreier also reported that voluntary buyout offers were given to some of the ZeniMax employees as a way of cushioning the deal or whatever to make that stuff make sense. But we should pivot into Game Pass overall, because this is the whole plan. Like, you buy Call of Duty, you buy all these studios, you buy up all this different potential, all this potential to put it on a monthly service and then charge a certain fee for that, and that's the future of the industry, or at least they thought it would be. Speaking of Game Pass, Microsoft apparently want to raise prices yet again, even though they just did in July 2023. But we have Sakana's Matt Piscatella, who's a phenomenal veteran analyst, weighing in and clarifying the reality of the financials in regards to Game Pass, saying that non-mobile subscription revenue, i.e. Game Pass, continues to stagnate after already slowing down in 2023. Game Pass revenue reportedly only went up by 1% in the last year. He says March 2024 non-mobile video game subscription spending was only up 1% versus April 2023's figures, and April 2023 he reported that spending in the US was only 2% higher than April 2022. So he says finding new subscribers beyond the console ownership base has proven very difficult, which is also something that Spencer has said, the idea that Xbox would lead the console race if they couldn't make Game Pass a more substantial part of their bottom line, and they have not. So you either have Game Pass at this point or you do not care.
Yeah, and you have like no real reason to jump in at this point either, especially if the prices are going up, because I think fundamentally at this point now, however many years into this project, and Phil Spencer's even admitted this himself, they haven't delivered on their initial promise of having a big release every 3 months or whatever it was that they suggested earlier on. And they might be finally getting to it now, but it's still too late. Like this year we've got Hellblade and we've got Flight Simulator, and we've got Indiana Jones coming at the end of this year. Yeah, but like, it's too little too late. People kind of already kind of associate certain things with Game Pass, and that's going to be difficult to change, especially when they've broken promises so many times and continue to break promises and have PR nightmares like this where you can't trust what they say anymore. Like, you know, I mentioned this in the previous video we did, but I personally used to give Phil Spencer so much slack and so much of the benefit of the doubt because he seemed like a nice guy. He came across very well at E3 showcases and Microsoft presses, and he seemed very charismatic. He felt like he had a vision for the brand. He felt like he had a vision for the developers, especially compared to someone like Don Matrick right back in 2013. Yeah. But now, when you directly compare the quotes from him and other executives about their plans for Tango or Arcane and look at their excuses now, I just think, how can you ever get that trust back? Like, it's going to take years to claw all that back and believe what any of these people say, because especially now that we know Microsoft as a big thing is more involved with the Xbox brand, we don't know anyone in Microsoft. Like, they're not going to be the spokespeople. It's ultimately, whether it's his decision or not, going to fall on Phil Spencer, going to fall on Matt Booty. And, fair enough, we might be able to cut them a little bit of slack for that, but at the same time, the Xbox brand as a whole and Game Pass by association just... to me, it has no trust, and it's not something you want to invest in. I don't think, not at this moment in time.
Well, there's all those rumors about like the rebranding of Xbox, the whole Microsoft gaming thing, like calling it Microsoft Game Pass and things like that. Like, my personal thoughts before I go any further is that the Xbox brand is done. Like, it's not that I don't think you'll get Gears of War games, Fable games, maybe a Perfect Dark eventually, although the latest update on that is that it still hasn't remotely come together. In the last few years, I just think everything's going to pivot into Microsoft gaming. Like, if you look at Microsoft's bottom line, there was some revenue numbers from 2022 that they made $198 billion in 2022, and Xbox made up $4 billion of that. It's chump change. It's pennies to them. Like, they do not care. They're the Windows company, and once you spend $70 billion acquiring a set of properties and you don't know what to do with them, I think you like said months ago, that this is only going to bring more ire down on Xbox from Microsoft, the top down, going, why? What have you spent this money on? You need to justify it faster and faster, which Jason Schreier now says in his new report that that particular business decision has drawn more scrutiny from the top down. It is interesting. Going back to this stuff, you had ex-Sony PlayStation boss Sean Layden tweeting saying that he got a lot of stick for saying that Game Pass would only ever work if they got 500 million subscribers, which at the time it was like, you don't know what you're talking about, this is the future, etc., etc. And him, like many people, didn't think the financials made sense from the beginning. Like I said, Microsoft are considering upping the price of Game Pass, but we'll see how that goes in light of all this stuff. But also, really interestingly here, in regards to how much money they spent on getting Call of Duty and Activision, all that kind of stuff, is that internally there are debates going on as to even whether they put Call of Duty on Game Pass. Internally, it's thought that would undermine and devalue the Call of Duty brand, which is hilariously tragically hilarious for how they internally view Game Pass as the lifeblood of Xbox anyway. But yeah, it's thought that it would impact sales. It wouldn't actually, be worthwhile to do that at this point. And if it's not worthwhile doing it now, I doubt it's going to be worthwhile doing it going forward. That was from Tom Warren over at The Verge. He says that at some point there might be some version of Call of Duty that appears on some version of Game Pass, depending on how they split the revenue and everything. But that's pretty damning. You spend $70 billion and you're not even going to make the most of it.
No, 100%. I mean, the Call of Duty question is kind of so strange right now, because if they're not going to put it on Game Pass and they're not going to make it exclusive, like, why buy it in a way? Why buy it just to get a bigger slice of the pie? I guess on the one hand, because they seem to be getting away from these smaller studios that bring in more modest profits, and they're kind of banking it all on the likes of Call of Duty and on Blizzard's games and these major franchises that have not only great upfront sales, but great post-launch microtransaction sales and a great tail to them. So I guess maybe at the same time, they're similarly worried about messing with that too much. Like, Call of Duty is $1 billion franchise. What if we mess it up? What if we mess it up and Microsoft are even more scrutinous of what we're doing? I can't believe they're not even considering trying it. Like you said, the fact that they're referring to Game Pass as a dilution of a brand and having that effect and having those connotations makes me wonder why they're continuing with Game Pass at all. And it makes me wonder if we're going to see more splits in the future, where kind of like how Sony treats PlayStation Plus, and I'm not saying this is correct either, but I wonder if they're kind of looking at that and going, well, we'll put some games like Hellblade on Game Pass, but we'll keep, stuff we know will sell for $70, $80 or whatever it is, and we'll keep that separate so we get the sales and we can try to have our cake and eat it too. Because I don't see it how this point, sorry, just before you jump in, how these subscription services can ever work. Like, you look at the sort of movie industry right now. It was just announced this morning that it was looking like Disney and Warner Brothers Max are going to merge, because Disney's Disney Plus is yet to make a profit 5 years into the project. It only lost $18 million last year. So maybe that will break even, or maybe even break a profit at some time, between now and 2028 or whatever it is. And gaming is even a harder sell, because I think consumer habits, I don't know if you would agree, are just so different to movie or TV viewing habits. Like, especially as games get bigger, why would you want to sort of keep that subscription going? I just think it's really difficult. They're at a real crossroads now, and like you say, Microsoft might continue, but the Xbox brand, I think, from literally this moment onwards, is never going to be the same again. It might not go away, but it's going to be different.
There's not even a box anymore, though. Like, that's kind of the thing. It's like the Xbox brand, like they're not bothered about selling hardware anymore. The whole thing Phil Spencer talked about was making Xbox into this like omnipresent, accessible app. You either get it on your phone, you can stream it on an airplane or something, and that's fine enough. Like, maybe the future of Xbox is an app on a TV and whatever. But like their hardware sales are only increasingly dropping off. I think they were 30% less this year, 30% down the previous year, and there's no reason to invest in this stuff. Like, a lot of their exclusives have made their way to PlayStation anyway. Most recently including Sea of Thieves, and that thing then topped the PlayStation Network chart, which is an interesting pivot because another thing reported by The Verge is that Microsoft are considering Hellblade 2 for PlayStation 5 following the success of these other exclusives making the leap across. So why would you ever invest in the hardware side of things for this? And I don't even know if you can argue that was the intent all along, like making Xbox this bigger, cloud accessible, Google Stadia style thing. But at the same time, even that wing of the business doesn't make any sense anymore. Like you might as well sit back and wait long enough and you'll get Halo and Gears of War as well.
Yeah, me and Ewan talked about this on last week's podcast, actually, and he was saying, like, it's just someone who was thinking about jumping into getting a Series X or a Series S for the franchises that they now own. He was talking about how if he knows they're going to come to PlayStation, he'll just wait because one, it'll probably be a better version anyway because the developers would have time to implement DLC or patch it up or whatever. And if not all the games are going to be on Game Pass, then I'm buying this box and I'm not even getting the benefit of having this stream of first-party stuff or whatever it is. And I think that's like you said, if you don't have that incentive to buy the Xbox, then what even is Xbox going forward? Are they just a kind of glorified publisher? And that makes me worried because, again, like you alluded to, the promise of Game Pass in the beginning was that you were going to get all of these different flavors and all of these different styles of games from developers that might not have otherwise got the budget or the chance to make them. You were going to get Hellblade alongside Gears of War, alongside Halo, alongside something like a third-party game like Immortality. And at this point in time, like, we've seen all the way throughout this year that these layoffs are kind of indiscriminate. They don't it doesn't seem to matter to these executives at this moment in time. So at this point, I'm worried for like all of the studios that Xbox has acquired over the past 5 years that aren't Activision, that aren't Treyarch, that aren't Infinity Ward, because I don't know where they fit in. And I want to make sure I approach this right because I don't want to, almost fear-monger over it, but I just want those studios that they've spent the past 5 years or past 10 years or whatever it is investing in to have a chance to make something. Because I think my biggest sort of gut punch with Tango was that they kind of weren't. Again, I said this the other day, they never got a chance to make a proper big AAA game that was Xbox exclusive. We got the great AA, if you will, Hi-Fi Rush that was shadow dropped, but we never saw them maybe even try to reach their potential with Microsoft backing, and I hope we get the chance to see what Ninja Theory can do this month, which with Hellblade, which they haven't, advertised at all, with Obsidian and Avowed and the Outer Worlds 2, and Double Fine and all of these, In Exile, all of these, studios that they've picked up over the past decade that they now just seem to be bored with before they've even given them the chance to produce anything for them.
That's the whole thing. How could you possibly, if you're a coder, you're a member of the creative, any one of the creative team, how could you possibly have faith that you're not going to be axed at a moment's notice because your particular game didn't sell enough? Even when you have something like Hi-Fi Rush, which was being praised by Matt Booty, Phil Spencer, the Xbox C-suite people, etc., saying that it's succeeded in every metric, that it did really, really well, it won BAFTAs. Like, if that's not enough, and that's not the perfect crystallized distillation of exactly what Game Pass is supposed to produce, then what the hell is? Like,
Absolutely.
other than just giving you a monthly fee so that you can get Doom and Diablo and Call of Duty for whatever that number is, but then they have to then make that number make sense, and it's never going to be as much as a £70 price point every few months. That whole idea, the bottom has completely fallen out of this because they never had enough people to support the monthly fee, and that doesn't make up the production costs of the various new projects that they then want to put together. It fundamentally has failed. Like, it's not going to work.
And at this point, I think, like I alluded to there, I've used the word allude a lot in this news story so far, Scott, but as I alluded to there, Sony is in not a similar situation, but they've had layoffs, and their excuse has been, these budgets are way too big, and we need to streamline our production process and focus on our big franchises, focus on the safer bets to make the money. But even that's not really necessarily working for them. So I worry that if Xbox is getting rid of these developers and aren't really too bothered about having stuff like Hi-Fi Rush supporting Game Pass, they're only going to eventually get into the same position that other publishers are currently in, where they're pumping $100, $200, $300 million into these franchises and getting ultimately diminishing returns as the years go on, because at a certain point people just want something new, they want something fresh, they want to see risks taken, and they don't just want like the same $300 million slop fed to them for $70 every few months. So it's like, even if they're pivoting now, I can see the future. I can see the future. Well, yeah. We've been through this before.
Yeah, like I said, for me, there's no way to bring this back together and make it work. They misfired on the whole. There was initially, let's go back like 5 years. They had this whole idea of they were buying up all these studios because they were going to have a new IP a new game every sort of 3 to 4 months. They would have this steady rollout of games, which obviously the pandemic got in the way of. Maybe a lot of this was just completely sideswiped by the pandemic, and they were never able to fully bring it back together. That could absolutely be the case. Once, like I said, on a long enough timeline, maybe we find out from Phil Spencer the reality of what it was like trying to do all this, bring all this stuff together. But I don't, that underlying sensibility of what Game Pass was supposed to be and how it would all fund and all that kind of stuff just isn't going to be the case. And like I said, if Hellblade 2 makes the jump, the thing is as well, like when you were like that idea of like being on the creative side in the middle of this, if you're Obsidian or you're Ninja Theory or whatever, and your game doesn't, like, what number do they want it to sell where you're actually safe? Like, and then are these the devs that end up being let go? Are Obsidian going to be let go before we even had a chance for a new Vegas 2 or something like that? Like, it is ludicrous when you really start thinking about it.
Honestly, man, that was exactly what I was going to say next. Like, I think at this point where we have all of this mixed messaging, and Hi-Fi Rush was a success and then it wasn't a success, and then they don't want to do a sequel even though they said it sold well and was a success by all metrics. At this point in the industry, across the board, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Sony, whether it's EA, I don't think anyone in the dev teams, anyone on the outside like us, or anyone in the actual publishing offices know what constitutes a success. They know they want the numbers to go up to satisfy the shareholders, but when you've got subscription services, when you've got DLC, when you've got all of these different revenue streams, like you said, what is a number where you're going to be safe? I hated the days when EA would come out and say Dead Space 3 needs to sell 5 million copies to survive, because it just was a little bit ludicrous, but at least they gave us a number. At least we knew what success looked like. Now, is it, if Hellblade drops, is it sales? Is it Game Pass retention? Is it Game Pass new subscriptions? What is it to make that a success in Microsoft's eyes? I don't even think they know.
No, well, the thing is, like, to bring it back around to that Matt Booty quote, like I said, head of Xbox, saying in the internal town hall that's happened in the last few days, trying to reassure people, etc., why all this stuff's happening and what the idea of Xbox is, he said, we need smaller games that give us prestige and awards. That is literally what Hi-Fi Rush did for you, and that wasn't enough. So, I mean, like, by buying a new yardstick and saying, well, look at this giant yardstick we've bought, it's Call of Duty, it sells all this stuff, then maybe they do just get as Corporate 101 as that and saying, well, you need to sell Diablo numbers or Call of Duty numbers or Elder Scrolls or Fallout numbers, or you're not going to be we're not going to, make this work. You had the thing that you say you want and you fired them anyway.
That's it. You've got what you want, but it's maybe not working in the way you want it to. Like you said, like we've talked about to death. I feel like I'm going crazy. Like, what do you mean you want games that are prestigious and win awards? You have some of the most prestigious, you intentionally bought some of the most prestigious studios in the world. You've got Double Fine, you've got Ninja Theory after their success with the original Hellblade, you've got Tango Gameworks after Hi-Fi Rush, you've got Arcane Austin, who made a dud in Redfall, but gave us Prey.
Prey, brother.
An unreal game that, didn't sell very well, but you ask like a lot of gamers about Prey now and they'll talk to you for hours about how intricate and well designed that game is. So you've got all of these developers, and theoretically, you've got the money makers as well. You've got Activision, you've got Blizzard, you've got the Elder Scrolls, you've got Fallout. You should have the arsenal right now. And if you don't, you've done something wrong because you've spent like nearly $100 billion. And again, it's on you, my friend. At that point, you can't spend that much money and own 30 studios and then suddenly say, well, we don't have enough resources to make prestigious games and we're not making enough money on the big games. Like, that's a you problem, my friend. It's not on the developers.